Arya knew what she was. She was a ghost haunting the edges of a life that was not her own, a shadow stitched to the heels of a family that had only ever offered her their darkness. Tonight, at the annual Black Diamond Gala, she was a ghost in garnet silk, a dress chosen not for her but for the way it would complement her sister's emerald gown. She stood beside a marble pillar, the cold stone a familiar comfort against her back, a solid thing in a world of shimmering, fragile cruelties. The air was thick with the scent of hothouse flowers and expensive perfume, a suffocating sweetness that clung to the back of her throat. Laughter, sharp and brittle as spun sugar, echoed from the crystal chandeliers that wept light onto the polished floor. She watched her adopted father, Mark, glad-handing his way through the city's elite, his smile a well-practiced currency. And she watched Clara, his biological daughter, his perfect jewel, bask in the attention like a cat in a sunbeam. Arya had learned 30 years ago, in the sterile quiet of an adoption agency, that she was a placeholder, a charitable act that had long since become a burden. The final confirmation had come a decade later, in a doctor's office that smelled of antiseptic and shattered hope. Barren. The word was a brand, an invisible mark that her family had somehow always seen, and they never let her forget it. "Oh, look," Clara's voice, a silken whip, cut through the din. She had cornered a small circle of socialites near Arya's pillar. "There's my dear sister. Always lurking in the corners. I suppose when you have nothing to contribute to the family legacy, you learn to make yourself small." The women tittered, their eyes flicking to Arya with a pity so sharp it was indistinguishable from contempt. "It's a tragedy, really. Such a beautiful vessel, completely empty." The words were meant to flay her open, and they did, but years of such cuts had taught Arya how to bleed internally. She kept her chin high, her gaze fixed on a point beyond them, a trick she'd mastered to keep the tears from forming. She did not know that from across the glittering expanse, a man was watching. He stood separate from the throng, a figure of stark stillness in a sea of motion. He was not watching the spectacle, he was watching her. He saw the subtle tremor in her hand, the rigid set of her spine, the way she absorbed the poison and stood taller. He saw the garnet silk clinging to a form that radiated a strength no one else in the room seemed to notice. Kenjiro, Oyabun of the Ryujin clan, did not see an empty vessel. He saw a fortress under siege, holding its ground with a dignity that shamed every diamond in the room. And in that moment, a decision, cold and absolute as the steel of a katana, settled in his soul. Mark approached him then, his posture a nauseating blend of arrogance and subservience. "Mr. Tanaka," he began, his voice slick with ambition. "A pleasure. A true pleasure. I trust the evening is to your satisfaction." Kenjiro's eyes, dark and fathomless as a winter ocean, did not leave Arya. He gave a barely perceptible nod, a gesture so economical it was almost an insult. Mark, oblivious, forged ahead, his desperation a foul cologne. "As we discussed, the alliance between our enterprises requires a more personal bond, a symbol of our shared future." He gestured grandly toward Clara, who glided to his side, her smile a predatory gleam. "My daughter, Clara, a graduate of Vassar, fluent in 3 languages and the future of my legacy. She will make a fine wife, a worthy mother to your heirs." The word heirs was a poisoned dart aimed across the room at Arya. Kenjiro's gaze finally shifted, moving from Arya to the father and daughter preening before him. The silence he commanded was a living thing, a pressure that made the very air feel heavy. He looked at Clara, his eyes sweeping over her with an unnerving lack of interest, as if appraising livestock that had failed to meet the most basic standards. Clara's perfect smile faltered, a tiny crack in her flawless facade. Mark's own confidence began to drain from his face, replaced by a sheen of sweat on his upper lip. "She is not what I require," Kenjiro said. His voice was not loud, but it possessed a terrifying resonance, a low thrum that cut through the ballroom's noise and seemed to vibrate directly in Mark's bones. Mark stammered, Not what you require. But she's perfect. She can give you." Kenjiro raised a single, gloved hand, and the word died in Mark's throat. His dark eyes moved back across the room, a magnetic pull, and settled once more on the silent figure by the pillar. He lifted his chin, a gesture of command, his focus so intense it felt like a physical touch. The golden thread of his attention crossed the chasm of glittering bodies and wrapped itself around Arya. Her, he stated, the single word in edict, a final judgment from which there was no appeal. The agreement stands. But I will take her. Mark's face contorted in a mask of disbelief, then horror, then a dawning, greedy realization. He looked at Arya, his discarded daughter, his barren burden, and then back at the most powerful man in the room. The deal was the deal. The instrument of it, he was quickly learning, was not his to choose. The world tilted on its axis. For a dizzying moment, Arya thought she had misheard, that the ambient noise had twisted his words into a cruel joke. But then the crowd began to shift. It was not a sudden movement, but a slow, inexorable parting, like water yielding to the prow of a great ship. Kenjiro moved through the space he had created, his steps deliberate and soundless on the marble floor. Every eye in the room followed him, a constellation of shocked and curious gazes all pointing to one destination, her. Her pillar was no longer a refuge, it was a stage. The air grew thin, and her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. He stopped before her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Up close, he was overwhelming. He was taller than she'd realized, with a stillness that was more intimidating than any overt display of power. He wore a bespoke suit of charcoal silk, so dark it seemed to drink the light, the only adornment a silver dragon coiled on his lapel, its ruby eye glittering like a drop of blood. The scent of sandalwood and something else, something clean and sharp like winter air, enveloped her. "You are Arya," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, spoken in that same low, resonant voice that had silenced her father. She could only nod, her throat tight with a knot of fear and confusion. He studied her face, his gaze lingering on her eyes, her mouth, the line of her jaw. It was an unnerving scrutiny, yet it felt different from the dismissive glances she was used to. He was not judging her. He was reading her, seeing the history etched in the fine lines of tension around her eyes, the resilience banked like coals deep within them. "My name is Kenjiro," he continued, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. "Your father and I have concluded a business arrangement. It involves you." The words were blunt, transactional, and yet the way he said them, the way his dark eyes held hers, made them feel like something else entirely. A pronouncement of fate. Clara's hiss was audible from a few feet away. "This is absurd. Mark, do something. He can't possibly want her." The insult was a reflex, but it broke the spell. The murmurs of the crowd swelled, a chorus of whispers dissecting her, questioning her worth, her purpose. "She's the barren one, isn't she? What could he possibly see in her?" This must be some kind of punishment for Mark, the humiliation, which had been a dull ache, sharpened into a fresh, piercing agony. Arya flinched, the whispers like tiny, sharp stones striking her skin. She instinctively took a half-step back, wanting to be swallowed by the marble, to disappear completely. But the pillar was unyielding, and Kenjiro's presence was a wall in front of her. He did not move, did not even glance at the gossiping crowd, yet his stillness seemed to grow, to expand, becoming a shield around her. His attention remained solely on her face, watching the storm of emotions that passed through her eyes. He saw the flicker of pain, the shadow of shame, and the core of defiance that refused to be extinguished. "They are insects," he said, his voice a murmur meant only for her. "Their buzzing is meaningless." He then did something that sent a new shockwave through the room. He reached out, his movements fluid and precise, and his gloved fingers brushed a stray curl of her hair from her temple, tucking it gently behind her ear. The touch was featherlight, almost impossibly gentle for a man who radiated such lethal power, but it seared her skin. It was an act of startling intimacy in a room full of strangers, a claim made without a single possessive word. The buzzing of the insects quieted. Mark, finally regaining his voice, scurried forward. Mr. Tanaka, perhaps we should discuss this in private. There seems to be a misunderstanding. She has certain limitations. He couldn't bring himself to say the word, not to this man, but the implication hung heavy and foul in the air. Kenjiro's hand dropped from her hair, and he turned his head slowly to face her father. The temperature around them seemed to drop by 10 degrees. There is no misunderstanding, Mark, he said, using his first name with a chilling familiarity. I am fully aware of her limitations, he paused, letting the word hang, then repurposed it. Her limitation is her greatest asset. You offered me a broodmare to secure your dynasty. I have no interest in your dynasty. I have an empire. An empire is not built on mewling infants. It is built on unshakable strength, on loyalty, on a queen who will rule beside me, not a vessel who exists only to be filled. Every word was a hammer blow, shattering the foundations of their shallow, status-obsessed world. He turned his gaze back to Arya, and for the first time, she saw something beyond the cold control in his eyes. A flicker of heat, a possessive fire that was both terrifying and intoxicating. I do not require an heir from her body, he declared, his voice rising just enough to carry to every corner of the silent room. I require the fire from her soul. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum where sound and breath had ceased to exist. The air crackled with the force of his declaration. Arya stared at him, her mind struggling to process the enormity of what he had just said. Fire from her soul. No one had ever spoken of her that way. She was the quiet one, the overlooked one, the empty one. She was a vessel of lack, a walking apology. But this man, this dangerous, powerful stranger, looked at her and saw fire. He saw a queen. The spell of the crowd's judgment, which had held her captive her entire life, was shattered. It was replaced by a new, terrifying, and exhilarating spell of his choosing. Clara, her face a mask of incandescent rage, finally broke. This is a joke. She is nothing. A barren, worthless charity case. You can't be serious, she shrieked, her voice shrill and ugly. She will ruin you. She will bring you nothing. Kenjiro didn't even honor Clara with a glance. His focus was a laser beam on Mark. Control your offspring, he commanded, his voice dropping back to that lethally soft tone. Or I will, Mark paled, grabbing Clara's arm and pulling her back, hissing at her to be silent. The power reversal was complete, a stunning and brutal recalibration of the social order. Mark, who had wielded Arya's infertility as his personal whip for years, was now being commanded to silence his perfect daughter on Arya's behalf. Kenjiro turned back to Arya, his body language creating an intimate space for them amidst the gawking onlookers. He reached into his jacket and produced a small, velvet box. He opened it. Nestled inside was a ring, but it was unlike any engagement ring she had ever seen. It wasn't a diamond. It was a single, perfectly spherical black pearl, held in a platinum setting that coiled around it like a sleeping dragon. The pearl seemed to absorb the light of the room, holding a deep, lustrous galaxy within it. It was beautiful, mysterious, and powerful. It was not a ring for a pretty, blushing bride. It was a ring for a queen. Your family has made you believe that your worth is measured by what you can produce, he said, his voice a low, private vow. They are wrong. Your worth is in what you are. In what you have survived. He took her left hand. His touch was firm, grounding. Her fingers trembled as he slid the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit, cool and heavy. A brand of a different sort. A coronation. As the ring settled into place, he looked up, his eyes meeting hers, and he sealed his promise. From this moment, you are under my protection. Any who insult you, insult me. Any who harm you, will answer to the Ryujin clan. You are no longer their shadow. You are my empress. He kept her hand in his thumb stroking gently over the cool surface of the pearl. The gesture was a quiet anchor in the swirling vortex of evening. The weight of the ring on her finger was a tangible reality, a solid point of fact in a world that had dissolved into a dream. Empress. The word echoed in the silent chambers of her heart, a foreign and impossible title. Yet, looking into the fathomless depths of his eyes, she felt a flicker of something she had long thought extinguished, a sense of belonging, a sense of worth that was not conditional. "Why?" she whispered, the sound barely audible. It was the only question that mattered, the one that screamed through her mind louder than the shocked gasps of the onlookers. "Why me?" He led her away from the pillar, away from the stunned, staring faces of her former family. The crowd parted for them as if by royal decree, their path to the grand terrace doors suddenly clear. The cool night air was a relief against her heated skin. They stepped out onto a vast, moonlit balcony, overlooking a labyrinthine garden. The noise of the gala faded to a muted hum, replaced by the gentle chirping of crickets and the scent of night-blooming jasmine. He finally released her hand but remained close, his presence a warm, solid shield at her side. He leaned against the stone balustrade, looking not at the garden, but at her. "Because I have spent my life surrounded by people who want something from me," he began, his voice losing its hard, public edge, becoming something more intimate, more reflective. "They want power, money, protection. They offer me heirs and alliances, daughters and sons. They offer me things that can be cultivated, grown, and eventually, that can betray. They see me as a means to an end." He paused, his gaze intense. "When I looked at you tonight, while they threw their worthless words at you, I saw the one thing in that entire room that was not for sale. I saw a woman who has been tested by fire and was not consumed. They called you empty, but I saw a soul that was self-contained. You do not need a child to feel whole. You do not need a man's approval to have value. You have a strength they cannot comprehend because it was forged in the silence they forced upon you. That," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "is a rare and precious thing. It is a strength I can trust. It is the only strength worthy of a throne." A single tear, hot and heavy, escaped and traced a path down her cheek. It was not a tear of sadness, but of a profound, earth-shattering release. For the first time, someone had not looked at her and seen a flaw. He had looked at her and seen her soul. She lifted a hand to her cheek, surprised by the wetness there. She hadn't cried in front of anyone in years. It was a vulnerability she never allowed, a crack in the armor she so carefully maintained. Kenjiro watched the tear fall, his expression unreadable but for a subtle softening around his eyes. He made no move to wipe it away, as if he understood it was not his to take, that it was a private grief finally being allowed to surface. "They tried to make a weapon of your pain," he said softly, "to use against you. But they tempered you into steel instead." Arya finally found her voice, though it was rough with unshed emotion. "I don't know how to be what you want me to be. An empress? I've only ever known how to be invisible." A small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his lips. It transformed his face, hinting at a warmth hidden far beneath the surface. "Good," he said. "The best rulers are those who have seen the world from the shadows. They are the ones who understand the true nature of light. I do not want you to perform. I do not want you to pretend. I just want you to stand with me. Your presence is enough." He pushed away from the balustrade and took a step closer, closing the small distance between them. He lifted his hand and cupped her jaw, his thumb gently brushing away the lingering trace of her tear. His touch was electric, a jolt of pure energy that shot through her entire body, lighting up nerves she didn't know she had. It was not a gesture of ownership, but of reverence. "I chose you, Arya," he murmured, his dark eyes holding hers captive. "Not as part of a deal. Not for an alliance. I chose you because when I saw you, I recognized a part of myself. A solitude. A strength that was born from being apart from the world, not a part of it. Your father thinks he sold you to me. He is a fool. I have liberated you. And in doing so," he confessed, his voice dropping lower still, a raw admission, "I feel as though I am liberating myself." The confession hung between them, fragile and powerful. He, the unassailable Oyabun, the man who commanded legions with a word, was admitting a vulnerability to her. He was connecting his freedom to hers. In that moonlit moment, standing on the precipice of a new and terrifying life, Arya understood. This was not a transaction. It was a collision of destinies. Months melted into a season, then another. The life Arya had known, a gray existence lived in the margins, became a distant, half-forgotten dream. Her new reality was a world of quiet grandeur, of sun-drenched rooms, and sprawling gardens that smelled of rain-soaked earth and cedar. Kenjiro's home was not a palace of cold marble and gold, but a sanctuary of dark wood, shoji screens, and glass walls that blurred the line between inside and out. It was a fortress, yes, but it was also a home, filled with art and books and the quiet hum of a life well lived. She was no longer a ghost. She moved through these spaces with a growing confidence, her spine straight, her steps sure. The garnet silk of the gala had been replaced by clothes of her own choosing, elegant, simple fabrics in deep, rich colors that made her feel grounded, seen. She was not adorned like a doll. She was dressed like a woman who knew her own mind. Her relationship with Kenjiro unfolded with the patient, deliberate grace of a Japanese garden being tended. He was a man of few words, but his actions were a language she quickly learned to understand. It was in the way he brought her tea in the morning, remembering exactly how she liked it. It was in the way his hand would find the small of her back in a crowded room, a silent message of support. It was in the way he would watch her read by the fire, his expression one of deep, quiet contentment. He never demanded anything of her, never pushed her to be anything other than who she was. He simply made space for her, a vast and protected space where she could finally, for the first time in her life, unfurl. One evening, as they sat on the veranda watching the sunset, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple, she felt a peace so profound it was almost painful. She wore one of his cashmere sweaters, the sleeves too long, the scent of him clinging to the fabric. He was beside her, a warm, solid presence. "I saw my father today," she said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. "He was on the news. His company is failing." Kenjiro didn't reply immediately, simply continuing to watch the sky. "I know," he said after a moment. "I withdrew my support a month ago." Arya turned to look at him, her heart giving a small, complicated flutter. "You did that for me?" He finally turned his head, his dark eyes meeting hers in the fading light. "I did that because a man who treats his own blood as a commodity is not a man worth doing business with." It was a simple matter of honor, but she saw the truth in his eyes. It was for her. It was his own quiet, devastating form of justice. There were still moments, of course, when the ghost of her past would whisper at the edges of her consciousness. A stray comment from a society page, a flicker of pity in a stranger's eyes, reminders of the woman she used to be, the label she used to wear. But now, those whispers were easily silenced. They were drowned out by the steady, reassuring presence of the man beside her. One afternoon, Kenjiro found her in the library, a vast, two-story room lined with books from floor to ceiling. She was standing before a large window, looking out at the rain, a pensive expression on her face. He came to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his warmth seeping into her. "What troubles you, my queen?" he murmured into her hair. She sighed, leaning into his embrace. "I was just thinking about how strange it all is. How my entire life was defined by something I lacked. And now, it doesn't matter. It feels like it never mattered at all." "It never did," he confirmed, his voice a low rumble against her back. "It was a cage they built for you. They were so busy staring at the lock, they never realized you had wings the entire time." She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes. She turned in his arms to face him, looping her own around his neck. The black pearl on her finger was a cool, constant weight, a reminder of the night everything changed. "You know," she said, a playful light entering her gaze, "for a big, scary Yakuza boss, you're awfully poetic, a rare, true laugh escaped him, a deep, warm sound that made her heart soar. "It is a little-known requirement of the job," he teased, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "That, and an appreciation for a woman who can silence a room without saying a word." He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. "I am a better man with you, Arya. You are the quiet in my storm." It was the closest he had ever come to a declaration of love, and it was more potent than any flowery sonnet. It was a statement of fact, an acknowledgement of the fundamental way she had reshaped his world, just as he had reshaped hers. The insults of her past, the pronouncements of her worthlessness, were finally just echoes from a distant country, spoken in a language she no longer understood. Here, in his arms, she was fluent in a new language, one of love, acceptance, and a strength she had always possessed, but had needed him to help her see. What do you think is the true meaning of strength? Is it the power to command others, or the resilience to survive them? Let me know your thoughts below. And if you enjoyed Arya's journey, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories where the underestimated find their true power. Their life settled into a rhythm of profound, shared solitude. They were two self-contained worlds that had chosen to orbit one another, their gravity a force of mutual respect and deepening affection. The wider world, with its demands and its dangers, still existed. Kenjiro still ran his empire with a hand of quiet iron, and the name Ryujin still commanded fear and respect in equal measure. But when he returned to the sanctuary of their home, he left that world at the gate. With Arya, he was simply Kenjiro, a man who enjoyed the silence, who found solace in the meticulous art of bonsai, and who loved the way his wife's laughter could fill a room. Mark and Clara had faded from their lives entirely. After his business collapsed under the weight of his own hubris and the silent, surgical withdrawal of Kenjiro's influence, Mark had been forced to sell their family home and retreat into a life of obscurity. Clara, stripped of her wealth and social standing, had vanished from the society pages, her glitter turning to dust. Arya felt no triumph in their downfall, only a quiet, detached sense of closure. Their power over her had been an illusion, built on a foundation of lies she had been forced to believe. Once that foundation was removed, their entire structure had crumbled into nothing. One crisp autumn evening, Kenjiro led her into a part of the estate she had never seen before. A traditional dojo, its wooden floors polished to a mirror shine, the air smelling of clean wood and discipline. Racks of katanas lined one wall, their blades sheathed, but their presence a potent reminder of his world. He slid open a screen to reveal a small, private room. In the center, on a simple wooden stand, rested a single, magnificent sword. Its scabbard was lacquered in a deep, glossy black, inlaid with a mother-of-pearl dragon. "This is the Ryujin Maru," he said, his voice filled with a rare reverence. "The soul of my clan. It has been passed down for generations, from one Oyabun to the next." He looked at her, his expression serious. "It is tradition for the Oyabun's wife to be its keeper, to guard it. It is a symbol that she is the heart of the clan, the protector of its soul, while her husband is its sword." He drew the blade a few inches from the scabbard. The steel sang a soft, high note in the quiet room, its surface a flawless mirror, a line of deadly light. "My mother was its keeper, and her mother before her. They were strong women, but they were keepers of a tradition they were born into. You are the first to be chosen not by blood, but by spirit." He slid the blade back into its sheath with a soft click. He lifted the entire sword and presented it to her, holding it flat on his palms. "I am entrusting you with my soul, Arya." Tears welled in her eyes as she reached out and took the katana from him. It was heavy, a profound weight in her hands. The weight of his trust, his history, his heart. It was the ultimate validation, a final, sacred testament to the queen he saw in her. She was no longer the empty vessel. She was the keeper of the dragon's soul.